We certainly
And
do.
it's good to meet up with an ESOP fellow
and,
after all
and,
these years.
and they send to go back for 20, 25 years, I think.
More, I think. Anyway, it's a great pleasure. Welcome to MNN Manhattan Network and Public Access Television.
I appreciate you having me, Harold. You know, I've seen your show on the web, and I appreciate that we have a dialogue on your show and we're not fussing at one another.
Let's try one.
Okay.
Fussing. That's a good Texas word, I think. And
That's
welcome,
right.
welcome very much to our conversation.
Thank you.
Pleasure to welcome. I'll introduce you. Welcome to Conversations. J. Michael Keeling. He's the president of the association, the ESOP Association in Washington, D.C., a major group of people put together to encourage ESOPs, or employee stock ownership plans. For those of you who viewed my program, you know that's something that I have a very soft heart, a place in my heart for, and it's really good to have an ESOP person here. And Michael Keeling, welcome very, very much.
Well, thank you, Harold.
Okay, as I said to you, we'd like to start the program. This is going to be about you in large measure, although I know we're going to be talking about the association and that. But could you share a little bit of your own background? It's been pretty checkered and interesting.
Well, I appreciate that. I was born in a little town in northeast Texas called Kilgore, Texas. Kilgore, Texas was the heart of the East Texas oil field. It had 2,000 oil wells in the city limits of Kilgore.
How many people?
10,000.
That's a lot of oil for those few people.
A lot of people had an oil well in their backyard. And
right next to the water well.
And we're all healthy, by the way. But having said that, then through a long series of events, I went off to Connecticut, went to Yale University, class of '69. And after graduating from Yale in 1969, I attended the University of Texas Law School. While in law school, I followed my lifelong interest in politics, legislation, worked for the Texas legislature, worked for the Texas Farmers Union, AFL, a couple of statewide campaigns, as a matter of fact. And shortly after finishing a campaign after law school, I took a job with Congressman J.J. Jake Pickle.
The immortal.
Yes, represented the 10th District of Texas, and for nearly 10 years, I was his chief of staff from 1972 to 1981. And after 81, a fairly typical Washington career path. I had a family, 2 children, wanted to make more money, and went out to be a lawyer lobbyist type.
In Washington?
In Washington. One of my very first clients when I left working for Mr. Pickle was the ESOP Association, which had been formed in 1978, had just moved to Washington late 1980, and they were looking for some help. Mr. Pickle was a senior man on the Ways and Means, the tax committee, and I had an interest in retirement policy, savings policy, and a big interest going back to when I was in college.
A fellow named Granados or something?
Lou Granados was the first director.
Very
first director.
Very first director. Way back then when they were getting started.
Back in the early 80s, Lou was kind of my supervisor when I was an outside lawyer. And
when did it get started again?
Late 78. It was the merger of 2 groups in California. There was one in Northern California and one in Southern California. Your friend Bob Smiley, that you'll remember, started the group in Southern California, and they realized they were a small
benefit
voice.
Capital or something?
Right. And they merged the 2 together and started in San Francisco after they merged, the 2 groups, moved to D.C. The truth of the matter is, in our nation, the encouragement of employee ownership through the ESOP model.
Yeah, we're going to have to spell that out for the audience.
And I want people to understand that the ESOP is a model of employee ownership. It is not the only way that employees can be owners of their companies. But that particular model is very dependent on federal statute, federal law, federal tax law. And the group said, well, gosh, being in San Francisco, California, is not necessarily going to help us with the U.S. Congress, and they moved to Washington in 1980, late 1980, and I started working with them in '82.
Louis Kelso was in. Some seen as the father of that in a certain sense. And
there's no question.
Underpinning was San Francisco.
There's no question that Lou Kelso's thinking and theorems of how to have a just society is an underpinning of the ESOP model. But I'd be quick to say Lou, who I knew, of course, as you knew, had a whole panoply of suggested policies. The ESOP was just one policy.
He had a great sense of humor.
Oh, he was a charming individual.
He was
very charming man.
Very good,
charming
very
man.
bright man.
And he perfected the ESOP model and was able to recruit and I was sharing this with about 40 employees in Lancaster, Pennsylvania yesterday. He was able to recruit Russell B. Long, Senator Russell B. Long, to be the champion for ESOPs.
I remember that well.
And Russell B. Long, to help people with their history, was the son of Huey P. Long.
Kingfish.
The Kingfisher.
Yes.
And
Down
Huey,
Texas way.
No, Louisiana. He was
yeah, I know Louisiana, but right next door.
Next door.
Yeah.
And Huey P. Long was thought to be, a lot of conspiracy theories here, to be a real threat to Franklin Roosevelt in terms of the president. He preached a populism that was very, very strong. He preached, in essence, taking away from anyone making over $100,000 at that time, 100% tax, and redistributing the money. They called him the Kingfisher. He was assassinated in the state capital of Louisiana.
Wasn't he thinking of running for the Senate? Or was
he was a senator at that time.
He was running for president.
Running for president.
Right, and serious.
And serious.
Yeah.
And had a large following in the nation during the Depression.
Every man a king.
Every man a king.
Yeah.
You can go into the state capital of Louisiana. If anybody's ever in Baton Rouge, you still see the bullet holes in the wall.
They left him there,
that the gunman shot and missed him, and it hit him some. Having said that, Russell Long was 16 years old and worshiped his dad, as a 16-year-old would do. Powerful man. And I always thought that when Lou Kelso presented to Russell Long, who had a reputation of being for the oil industry, being for the cotton people, being for the Port of New Orleans, that's Louisiana, that this was his way to fulfill his father's legacy, to make every man a king, to make every man an owner, every person, now we would say every person.
Reach down in those populist roots.
That's right.
Yeah.
And when Russell retired, we had a big banquet, the association did, and we composed a song in honor of Russell.
Can you sing it now?
I forget the tune. I can't remember the tune, but I can tell you some of the verses.
Should we try to get some backup rock musicians in here?
The theme of the song was that when Russell went to heaven, and there'd be St. Peter, and there'd be his dad, Huey P., and they'd say, Russell, what did you do for the people when you were the senator? And they'd say, you were helping the oil companies, and you're helping the cotton boys, and you're helping the shipping boys, and the sugar cane boys. What'd you do to help my legacy, Russell? Why you get to come into to the pearly gates? And the song went, Russell answered, I did the ESOPs.
Okay, that's good. I want that. You got that down on record?
You know I don't know where that song
is. We're in committee. We need that kind of.
But that's a little bit of the history, and I became their lawyer lobbyist in '82, got more and more involved with them. They became my favorite client. And then in the late 80s and 90s, there were some bumps in the road.
Now, who became your favorite client?
ESOP Association.
ESOP, so you were on your own then. I see, right.
Yeah, I was on my own.
You became general counsel, I think.
That's right. But I was still outside at that time. I was not
in Jeff Gates?
Yes, I knew Jeff very well. Yeah. Jeff was working for Senator Long at that time.
Very well, and he's carried the ball.
And I don't mind saying, I've had many a senator say to me, they're a wonderful man, Russell Long. I love Jake Pickle. Dearly, he was my boss for 10.
He filled Mr. Johnson's shoes,
he was man
for sure.
I shouldn't say this, but we're on
no,
access.
No. Access. You can say
I'm going to say it.
Yeah.
They used to. The people who knew both President Johnson and Congressman Pickle, because he was a Johnson protege.
Yes.
And if anyone's ever listened to the Johnson tapes that have been published, that's exactly how Jake Pickle talked and thought.
Really? Like Johnson?
Just like Johnson.
That's Texas.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit Johnson, too.
Yeah, and Johnson was a real persuader.
and the story I've been told when I was a young person working for Mr. Pickle, that people would say to me, well, your boss, Mr. Pickle, he's just like Lyndon Johnson, the president, but he's a nice guy.
That's funny.
But I loved Russell Long. Yeah. What the highlight, and the current chair of the Finance Committee, famous Max Baucus of Montana, John Danforth, the famous preacher senator from Missouri, both of them have said to me that the highlight of their career was serving years with Russell Long
when he was chairman.
when he was chairman of the finance,
But
and they were on the committee.
He really
He was
ran.
a wonderful man, a wonderful, gentle
You're
man.
familiar. You're in Washington. You have to know about power and how power is done, and a lot depends upon the power of a person. And Russell Long was inordinately powerful as a Senate chairman of
the Finance Committee, and put the ESOP
of,
law in.
In terms of the whole system.
The whole system.
I mean, he wasn't just another senator, as you
That's
say,
right,
or much less a representative.
Let me-
And he came charging into the Senate the day after he had the Eureka meeting at
With-
the Montpellier room
with
in the
Kelso,
Madison Hotel.
with Mr. Dr.
And
Kelso.
they had that, and he came in and he said, remember Mr. Nixon, 1972,
Oh, yeah.
had said, we're all Keynesians now,
Right,
remember?
right.
And then he came in and he said, I'm no longer a Keynesian, I'm a Kelsonian. And the whole economics establishment said, who the hell is
Kelso? That's
He had
correct.
been in the wilderness. Am I not correct?
You're correct about
Okay.
that. Let me tell you what Congressman Pickles said about Russell Long and about individual power. One day I was sitting in Congressman Pickles' office and we're talking, and some reason or other Russell Long comes up. And being a senior man on the House Tax Committee, Mr. Pickle would go to these conferences when they do the big tax bills. And he said, you know, Russell Long, keep in mind, this is Lyndon Johnson's protege, and you've read the books about Johnson, how he could make the Senate just, do whatever he wanted. Whatever.
Tremble,
Right.
He was like a volcano. Yeah.
So here's a man
the
who...
Johnson treatment.
Right.
Yeah.
Here's the man that worked for Lyndon Johnson for years and years and knew the Johnson treatment, knew how he operated.
Yeah.
And Pickles says, Russell Long, he's the only man I know that can take a group and move them from A to B, and they don't even know they've left A yet.
Well, that's
and that's the magic. That's a magical power.
That
and it was a soft touch. It was a soft, gentle touch where he worked with people.
Russell you're talking
Yes,
about. Russell
soft, gentle touch.
Yeah.
And he took the cause of ESOP at heart, and really the basic law we have
Rail
now.
Reorganization Act of
But mainly the tax
1974.
code.
Okay, yeah,
The 74 ERISA, 86 tax reform had a lot of assist,
That
by the
set
way.
up ERISA? It was ERISA that was...
ERISA codified the ESOP.
Okay.
And that's where the phrase ESOP comes from. Kelso didn't call them ESOPs. He
Okay.
called them Kelso plans, second income plans. But
and we ought to get around talking to what an ESOP. A lot of people
wouldn't know
what an ESOP.
what in the world we're talking.
It's not Aesop's tale, or
Right,
anything
no,
like that,
no,
like
no.
a fable. Or anything,
Wouldn't
but
know,
it's
but
very-
I'll finish.
It's very important in the history of economic theory, in my humble way of thinking. It's huge. It's Galileo compared to the Ptolemaic view of the universe. It's huge in terms of economic theory.
And for me, to me, it's huge in the concept of a decent human system of human beings working together for common goal.
Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing?
And
all human beings in a
and
just
I will
system.
I will say that we can legitimately debate some of the details, but I will tell you I've been in over 400 employee-owned companies, and when I finish the statement, I'll do a brief explanation of what an ESOP is.
Yeah, okay.
I've been in over 400 ESOP companies. We do have a market economy. There's no guarantee that any business will automatically succeed, that being an owner, my dad was a small businessman. I've been around small business all my life. There will be ups and downs. I just got off the phone with one of our ESOP companies. It's works in the housing construction area.
Oh boy.
You can imagine
All the
they're
subprime
hurting,
stuff
and that
now,
means if
yeah.
you're owning shares in that particular company, that share value may be down.
Yeah.
But overwhelmingly, and there's 30 years of evidence, data, that shows these employee-owned companies, the vast majority of them, are high-performing companies, high job satisfaction, low turnover, sustaining jobs here in the United States. So to
Some
me,
of the bigger ones are turning. Corey Rosen tells us apparently from some of the literature I read that a lot of the bigger companies are not going along with the ESOP.
well, you're having
or
a
am
well,
I wrong on that?
the way the law has developed,
Yeah,
and I'm going to back into what they
All
are in
right,
a second.
good, yeah.
The law that is in place and that has been there since 84 and tweaked in 89 and then another law in 98, long after Russell Long leaves and Lou Kelso's passed away, has really encouraged the creation of employee-owned companies in the sector of the economy that's our private companies, generally between 50 and 250 employees.
Okay.
The large public traded multinationals
Right, the biggies.
don't really get an advantage from doing the classic leveraged ESOP transaction the way they did in the late 80s. And I'll
Okay,
dovetail into that, because if it is Galilean and if you're going to follow Lou Kelso, that's an awful thing to happen. But having said that, an ESOP, to help people, it is a deferred compensation plan that is into a trust of company stock. It is a kissing cousin of a 401k plan, which most Americans are familiar with.
I think 401 came after that.
401s are 1978, but they became popular in the 80s.
There was legislation relevant to in 1973 that was done with Mr. Simon and Mr. Long. There was major legislation.
Well, that became the ERISA.
That became ERISA.
That all became
That
ERISA.
was a major turning point.
Right.
At least it laid the
that
groundwork for a major turning point.
But the ESOP is a tax-qualified deferred savings plan where the employee is receiving compensation that is going to be deferred in terms of his or her cashing out in the form of company stock. And here's the Kelsoian piece, all right? The uniqueness of the ESOP is, compared to other plans that are deferred comp, the ESOP can use borrowed money to acquire its assets. It can leverage, in other words.
Yeah, that's
and
right.
The theorem that Lou Kelso had, which is valid, that people don't get access to financing unless they have money.
That's a true fact. Money
allows you to borrow money from the bank.
Them that's rich get richer, and those that are poor get babies or trouble.
Or they get Visa cards and MasterCards and prepaid phone cards.
Yeah.
And
so
he said, you know, there should be a way to bring people into the capitalistic system. And here's an important point. Lou Kelso was very much a free market, free enterprise, capitalistic oriented person. His roots were back in the Depression as a young man going to college. And he saw the trouble and the trouble and the turmoil of individuals as unemployment went to 25, 28, 29%, 30%.
Ever tell you the story about how he helped people off the freight trains and their hands were locked on because they were riding, and the trains were full, or were all the people were on the rails, and the cars were empty because there wasn't enough demand capability among the people to buy what could be done. Yeah,
and he saw that, and if you study history, there was a great deal of turmoil in America at the time that tilted the nation towards government ownership, socialism, etc.
Well,
Karl Marx's thoughts about capitalism, that it would eventually fail because the rich would get so rich, the poor would get, and you'd have social disorder, disobedience in society, and it would come unravel. Lou Kelso looked at that, thought about that, but he came to a different conclusion than Karl Marx.
Said Karl Marx was an almost capitalist.
Right. And really, if you study Karl Marx, there's a lot of truth to that. He came to the conclusion that Marx's fault was that he didn't have an end game to his observations. He didn't know really where it was going to take society. And if you look at the progeny of Marxism, i.e. modern communism, they obviously don't have an end game as to what they do with society.
I'm not sure we have an end game.
Well,
I mean, that's my...
That's why you like Lou Kelso, because he had an end game.
Well, he had a
And his end game was that if you allowed average income people to have access to ownership
or capital credit
through the companies that they worked in, you would address this issue of inequality of wealth and productivity. Let me say this, the modern ESOP movement, because Kelso had a lot of different things he recommended. I'm just ESOP. You know, our group lobbies for ESOPs and we educate about ESOPs. And it's been the most popular piece of Kelsoianism that has prevailed.
Yeah, it refers to the corporate enclave.
Right.
Or
and,
the corporate,
is that what has happened in the ESOP world, and you can go back and forth on whether this is, you know, the way to go or not. The Kelsoian drive that this is an economic model, a financing model that leads to a better perfection of our economy has really kind of fallen by the wayside. The dominant case that the ESOP world makes for employee ownership now, Harold, is kind of based on the human system that evolves, where you have people sharing in the ownership, the participation, the empowerment of the individuals, etc. That is what I have seen over the years excite the leaders of ESOP companies, excite the average pay. And so we've kind of had a change in the last 25 years that I've been around the ESOP. It's not promoted as much the way, you know, Lou did and the way you believe and some of the others.
Yeah.
It's really promoted these days more as a great human system. I'm getting somewhere with this.
Yeah, I'd like to get to the idea of the human system.
What that does is it has become in Washington, D.C., I'm convinced, fairly accepted that where you have a smaller human system of 200 people, 300 people, where the leadership and the average pay employees are interacting, they know one another. You know the CEO when he walks through the factory floor, and that there's a human kind of intangible, subjective spirit build that is special, that makes that a special place to work.
Very American. Yeah.
And they reject the idea that when you have 50,000 employees, like the United Airlines had, like the Chicago Tribune had, that a lot of the cynics about Kelsoanism and ESOP say, oh, it doesn't work in that. The laws we have, Harold, encourage that smaller company to do the ESOP through a transaction that's known as the exiting shareholder. The baby boomers who started their companies after World War II in the early 50s are all retiring.
Yeah, that's true.
And they've got private assets, private stock.
Now,
You can't sell it on the stock market. And they can sell it to the ESOP. And if it's a good individual, you know, they're taking care of the employees, they're perpetuating the company instead of just selling it out to a competitor or walking away from it. So if you look at, and I know you have, Harold, if you look at the vision of the ESOP Association, which we developed back in the early 90s, it's a vision of an America where the vast majority, we don't define vast, but you know, it's more than 51% of the employees in America are significant owners of stock in the companies where they work.
That's not the case now.
No. And let me, you think about what I just said. If that is your vision, and 50% of the Americans work for large, publicly traded, multinational companies, and you do not have a set of laws or policies that perfect the stock ownership in those companies, you in essence are not really living by your vision. If the ESOP community and the ESOP Association, and I'm loyal and obligated to help my members, 95, 98% of my members are 250 employees, you know, in that range.
Right.
Very few are big you know, I only have 2 or 3 big companies that are members. But if your vision is for all of Americans who work in the private sector, and you're just trying to protect the little companies that have the employee ownership, not working for the laws to expand it into the larger group.
You should be working for those laws.
That's my point.
That's what you're doing.
We're not living by our vision.
I think you're living by that.
Well,
and
we're trying, but
it's a vision that should be encouraged by a whole lot more people than it seems to be, not only in the general society, but in the halls of power.
Yeah, and so
that's where you're on the right spot, because you're on Potomac on the.
But I recognize.
Now,
let me make this statement that many Americans don't realize. Lou Kelso knew this, and people like Corey Rosen know this. Anyone who's ever studied the history of stock ownership knows it. The concept of having employees have a stakehold in the company where they work developed in the United States in the 19th century.
We had the Homesteads Act.
Well, but this is stock in corporations. As our nation moves from an agricultural society to the industrial age, and we had our original companies, Railway Express, Sears and Roebuck, Montgomery Ward. I can go down the list.
Ford Motor Company?
Procter and Gamble.
I'm from Detroit.
This is
Ford
even
Motor
before. This before cars.
Yeah, but let's get a word in for Ford.
Okay, we'll get a word in for and GM. and GM. The president of GM gave in
What's good for GM is good for the
Well,
world.
let me tell you something. The president of GM gave a speech in the 20s. I don't know the name of that man, but
Sloan?
no, it's
No.
back in the 20s.
Wilson. No,
It's
no,
someone with GM about the solution to all our problems was to have the employees be shareholders.
Is that a
in
fact?
the,
Yeah.
That is a fact.
Well, let's get that on
And
the archives, right?
and it motivated a man in Western Michigan who actually predated Lou Kelso with the idea of having.
Who that was?
His name is Bradford.
Okay, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know him.
He's not in good health. I was visiting in his
Sorry.
company the other
Yeah.
day. But to go on, he
Well,
read that speech, by the way, in the Reader's Digest in
You
a
mean the
barber
one-
shop in 1951.
I'll be damned. Isn't that great?
That's
51, there was a lot of good stuff.
Right.
But I wonder if we could back up a little bit, if you don't mind.
No,
all right?
go ahead.
It's very interesting, laid out in the ESOP is good, and I'm here to say that the ESOP Association that you represent should be supported by a whole lot more people, and the concept's really important. But you're looking at it back, and Louis Kelso came along. He was the first ever to, if I'm not mistaken, set me straight, maybe not, but he did one of the very, very first, what they called leverage buyouts, of a newspaper chain in California, where he took the assets of the corporation as a substitute for collateral in order to get capital credit to people who normally don't have capital credit, which are most of us, in order to then set up a trust that could pay for the stock out of its own earnings. And there's a logic to business finance that you will make an investment that pays for itself out of its future earnings.
Sure.
We can't stick to savings alone. Mr. Molden, Mr. de Gaulle said that is going to lock us into an eternal class struggle. We have to open up capital credit, and we have to get some distribution of income to people, the people, let's say, by ownership of capital assets, because as Lewis underscored very clearly, he's got charts to show it, you're familiar, that the input mix to capital, I mean, the input mix to production in the American economy was moving through time from Tom Jefferson's time to the modern time, very much from a labor-oriented thing. Everybody on the frontier in Tom Jefferson's day had a hatchet to cut down a tree. Took 12 hours to make a pair of boots, no manufacturing, no capital input to the production at all, maybe 10%, Lewis reckoned. And by the time we come into the modern experience, only about 10% of the actual production is realized through human labor, intellectual or physical, and the capital assets are responsible for the production, and they're all owned by a relatively plutocratic small class, and he addressed that issue and the labor theory of value that informed all economic theory.
Now
that makes him Galileo,
and
in my view.
In your view. And there's the counter to your view is most economists would say you can't separate labor and capital in the manner that he did.
Most economists are comparable to the people who supported the geocentric view of the universe in Galileo's time.
Let me say
Louis Kelso was on the cutting edge, and he's a radical revolutionary.
But what you just described is a leverage.
In my view.
What you just described is a leverage buyout.
And
what you just described are the private equity firms in New York City, where they borrow money based on. The difference is, and this is the justice of it, the difference in what Lou Kelso was saying versus the very successful LBO firms. By the way, the Kelso company is one of the biggest.
Kravitz and all those,
Steve, I can go. They call them private equity firms now. It's all the same. They too finance their operation through credit. The only difference is Lou's insistence was that you cut the employees in on the deal.
He did not want only the employees. That's good for the corporate enclaves. He wanted to cut the people in.
Well, that's not the ESOP money.
The capital assets are all owned by a tiny plutocratic class and getting more. The capital ownership of capital in this economy is more concentrated than it was in 1789 Versailles, France.
Right. And having
it's
said
only
that,
a small group that owns all the assets. And
but
let me finish. The assets are responsible for production increasingly. The labor input is less, and we're out of touch with what the future requires.
All things go back to somebody working with something else. Money's not magical. It doesn't create money by itself, and that's the counterpoint. That's the counterpoint. But let me say it again. You're talking about some things that Lou recommended being done to bring more justice to society.
I'm more interested in his theory. He
but,
is a theoretician.
But he had 8 different things he recommended, and the ESOP was the
he
the
had all
ESOP's
kinds
the
of
only
way
one.
of bringing the
Right.
people in on it. The
ESOP is only
companies
one.
could bring in
Right.
their
Right.
customers.
Right.
There were all kinds of ways
Right.
in which you could do it. That was
But
much
the-
bigger,
but-
and that required certain things within the structure of the federal system that have not yet been enacted.
Right.
And
And
ESOP and the employee moments behind it has not even begun to realize its potential in our economy now.
Don't
It's
equate.
ahead. It's in
Your
the
mistake
future.
is this, Harold.
It's not a mistake.
Yeah,
I submit. Of course, it's my beliefs, so I don't make my mistakes.
You've expressed Kelsoian as if the ESOP is his whole package.
No, the exact opposite, if I may, Mr. Keeling.
Yeah.
It's
But
the exact
ESOP
opposite. It was a
model-
whole economic philosophy,
Right.
much bigger and more relevant than Marx
And we're
or
not the
Keynes
Kelso
or
Association.
Keynes
I
or
understand.
any of the basis of
But
economic
Harold,
theory of all our academicians.
Harold.
And our system is out of date with what
Right.
the future requires, and we'd better come up with something because this planet is in very difficult time because of
Having
the
said that,
injustice
Harold,
and the contradictions
you told me
that
to
exist.
have you be quiet when you got to talking too much. Harold.
Well, you just did.
That's right. I took your word for it.
All right.
Harold, the transaction of using the assets of a private corporation to buy and expand or to buy another company or to flip from public to private, that transaction is just a basic LBO transaction. That transaction is one that Lou said when that is done, when you're doing that kind of transaction, that a great thing could be done for society since private business occupies such a large part of our economy.
Yeah.
It doesn't
I get
occupy all of it. Many of our people work for the government. Many of our people work for nonprofit corporations.
Yeah.
Not everybody, in other words, to...
And we want a mixed economy, don't we?
I understand.
We want private and public sector,
But
both,
my
right?
point is
Yeah.
this. The ESOP model is in essence a model that takes the LBO model
Yeah.
and just says, all right, if you're going to do this, if you're going to do leveraging to
Right.
change the structure of a corporation, to take it public to private or to buy out the existing shareholders, to put in new shareholders.
Do it in the name of the folks.
Do it in the name of the employees. That's the
Well, you
ESOP
call it
model.
employees. I say beyond the employees.
That's
it's
the
the
other
people.
things that
It's the people.
I understand. That's the other things
That was a
Lou
bigger
talked about.
vision that he had.
Yes.
And
yeah.
that was
There's
in
no
keeping-
question about that.
And that was in keeping with the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
Because that input mixed to production of labor, the labor theory of value. You did economics and politics and economics in the university. The basic.
I didn't do much economics.
Just
the politics.
I do a lot of programs. I do a lot of programs. All kind. You saw my list. Some of
Yeah,
them.
yeah, right.
One of the ones I did was I like polymaths and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And one of them was a really well-known, famous person named Isaac Asimov.
Sure.
Yeah. Isaac Asimov was such a grand fellow, and we did a program with him. And I looked it up. I looked it up in Who's Who or something.
Yeah,
He was
yeah,
in
yeah.
Who's Who, right? And I looked him up, and he had written, I think, something like 700 books. He wrote a book like I would write a letter home to mother, on every subject under the sun.
Right.
Literally.
Right.
Math, art, everything. He wrote on, and he confessed before. And we got on the program, and so I started the program, what have you written a book about?
Yeah.
ESOPs or whatever.
Yeah.
What have you written a book? There was only one discipline or one understanding of things in the human condition that was beyond his ken. He could not fathom it. The only one was he could not understand or write anything about economics.
That's interesting.
It was beyond belief. He could not handle it or anything. And yet it informs the whole political process,
I appreciate
the
that.
whole business process,
I appreciate
and
that.
what we have accepted out of history.
I appreciate that.
I submit what we have out of history assumed as legitimate is not comparable or is not capable of meeting the requirements of the future.
And I would
where
submit to you.
technology is increasingly
Yeah.
productive.
And I would
You've got to bring the people in on it. We need democracy rather than plutocracy.
Having said what you said, I would submit to you that the thing that makes excitement that's recognized in Washington about employee ownership, and I'm going to keep you on employee ownership.
And I am going to do everything I can
to bring it beyond that.
No. First order, and I really thank you for coming a place where I am.
Right.
Because I'm sort of, a loose, what they call a loose
cannon.
Okay,
Right.
you understand. You are responsible, and your
Right.
institution is, and I want to give support to everybody out there who are responsible, or even those who are wanting to be responsible, to get associated with this responsible organization that should be supported by everybody.
Right.
I understand. I'm for you 100%. I'm just thinking we got to go beyond it. That's all I'm saying.
And a lot of
Way
folks say, and
beyond
your
it.
friend Norm Kurland says that, and Lou said that. He was the father of
You know who else
saying
says
more.
that? You know who else says that? Muammar Gaddafi. I think it's the only country in the world that's setting themselves up in a way that's in keeping with what the future requires.
That's interesting, because that's
could
an
go
area I
into
don't
it.
know much about at all. But I'm going to go back to employee ownership.
Okay, good.
Because that's the field that the ESOP is in.
That's right.
It's not about government employees. It's not about people who, perhaps sadly aren't able to work
Right.
in any sector. It's not about, group ownership of various utilities and so forth.
Yeah.
The thing that excites
Yeah.
policymakers and excites the men and women that I see and work with in the companies that are ESOP is not the economics, to be honest about it, of the ESOP. Now, I agree, money talks and the BS, can walk.
Yeah.
And certainly the company that is having share value go up and average pay employees have ESOP account balances that are way beyond anything they ever dreamed of.
People have retired as
Millionaires.
millionaires. There are.
Way
Built
beyond,
upon,
way
yeah,
beyond.
Upon the logic
I'm
of,
not
proper
dismissing
finance,
that, but I'll tell you that my experience is, over the 25 years, in the employee ownership field, in the ESOP field, and this does not contradict your desire to have it become bigger, because I would say this is the foundation on which it gets built.
The
is
way
the
I'm
excitement.
going is going to bring you a lot. If what
No,
I'm thinking of is right, it's
and
going
what
to
I
put
would submit,
ESOPs on the map.
What I would submit to you is
the world map.
the excitement, the spirit of being in a human endeavor together.
Yeah.
The magic of, and you can't bottle it.
You
can't, you've had some Rich Bernackes and the Mendelssohns and their companies here in New York City. What goes on in those companies
is
quietly, day to day, is so much satisfaction.
That's
to observe that kind of interaction.
Like fellas jamming in a band that they're a part of,
together.
right? Yeah.
That story of what Lou Kelso's legacy, whether he intended that to be his primary legacy or not, because his intent was really the economic system and making it more fair and just.
Not a small matter.
I remember he said, we're wanting to do the ESOP for the reasons you said, and as a result, the employees are the natural shareholders. They will be the best shareholders.
Well, isn't it true?
They will be the best.
In your experience, you got
that is what I'm saying.
You got 1,400 in the ESOP,
14
and
to 15.
those people are where the employees own the stock that represents
through the
company,
ESOP,
through
the model.
Now, isn't it good that they own that? Wouldn't they feel better? Let me just ask you. It seems to me you deal with them all the time. Tell me from pragmatic experience. Don't they feel better being the owner of the entity of which they are employed, rather than a mere wage
shared
slave?
owner, a part
a
owner.
shared owner,
They're
a
not-
partner. You know,
shared
Muammar
ownership.
Gaddafi sets up, just for the heck of it, he's thought of as a terrorist and all that kind of stuff and everything. They've set up a business. They had a lot of money because everybody got rich. They had a lot of oil, so they got homes to everybody and all that kind of. And then you can start a business. And the one thing they do, they can't really carry it out because it's so, radical and everything.
Right.
But they could start a business. They'll help you over all the startup and everything.
Yeah.
But what they want ideologically is nobody to get any wages at all. They want to do away with wages. Did you ever see Coconuts, the movie Coconuts with Groucho Marx?
Yeah, I've seen
Groucho
it.
Marx, he comes down the stairs and all these people are coming, well, what do you want to do, be wage slaves? Like Marx says. And he said, well, we'll take away your wages. But he says, and in Bolivia, they got everybody, if you start the business, you can't hire anybody. You can't hire anybody.
Yeah.
Everybody is a partner, owner of the assets of the company.
Right. Now, let me make this
understand
clear.
what I just said?
I understand what you said, but I want to
That's
make it
radical.
clear. I want to make it clear to
You're
you.
not a supporter of Libya's economic
I don't know
policy.
a thing about
Oh,
Libya's
okay.
economic policy.
Well, you might
Let me
want
make
to.
this point to you, and I think it's sometimes that fellow travelers of Kelsoian theory, think
Go off the reservation.
the ESOP is not the co-op model.
No, I
Now,
know.
keep that in
Right,
mind.
right.
And Lou Kelso did not endorse the co-op model.
Right, no, I know.
The co-op model the worker-owned co-op. We're all familiar with patronage co-ops, the rural co-ops and the electric co-ops and the telephone co-op. This is where the employees are shared owners in the business.
Right.
And it's all one person, one vote, and they tend to each have an equal say.
Do they always vote voting rights through with the...
Right, the ESOP, no.
No, the ESOP, no. Right, right.
But
Okay, yeah, that's a big issue, I know.
In co-ops, in essence, what our experience in America has been, and you can have the co-op advocates come in, you know, for another show you're going to do later on someday.
Yeah.
What happens in a co-op that they haven't taken off like the ESOP model is that they tend to be even smaller than small. They tend to be 10 people, 12 people, where the concept of like a small law firm, small CPA firm, where there's true partners, and every partner has an equal voice. The ESOP model does not create that kind of partnership.
Right, okay.
It creates a shared ownership concept where different people do have, based upon their salary level, their length of time of working in the company, will have different share allocations in that trust.
Yeah, and they can become vested
and leave. That particular thing is important to remember, because many people, when you talk about what's holding back employee ownership in America, which, by the way, I'm going to say something to you that I say to people all the time when I visit in the company.
Say it.
What's the highest position you can hold in a capitalistic society? What's the highest thing you can be?
I don't know. I mean,
owner.
Owner, yeah.
Not the king, not the dude. To be an owner is the highest level. You're a player when you're an owner.
You might equate that. If we go back to, you mentioned Karl Marx and whatnot, and you got this world being ruled by politics. The institution of private property ought to be vouchsafed, that you can't just seize property willy-nilly because you got some power, military or otherwise. That's a very important principle. And in the Arab world, they maintain an interest in the institution of private property, unlike, let's say, Stalinist Russia or something. And that's something to keep in mind.
So to continue the discussion, being, you know, a shared owner, whereas most people, I will say Americans, but I'd assume it's true in Western society as a general rule, their concept of ownership goes back to their youth, their childhood,
tribal,
where they they had their teddy bear, or their football, or their dial.
I had all those.
And when you had your teddy bear, and you wanted to go to Grandma's house, and you wanted to take your teddy, you took it.
I did indeed.
And now you grow up, and you might have a car.
I better have my iPod.
And I have a tie.
Yes.
I can tear my tie up if I want to.
Right.
I own my tie.
Yeah, it's very much a part of freedom.
And so when people come into an employee ownership situation where it's shared property ownership, not personal ownership, if I get mad at my coworkers, unlike it was with my pals, that if they wouldn't let me be the quarterback, I'd take my football home with me and go to heck with you.
You did that? Were you a quarterback?
I was at one time.
You were quarterback?
Very young.
Get a varsity letter?
No. I played other positions eventually.
You play in the Rose Bowl?
No.
Okay.
But the point I'm making is, when an individual is told you're now an owner in the company, they have to understand that it's shared ownership.
Right.
It's not personal property ownership. And if I get mad at my coworker or my supervisor, I can't just take the PC home with me and say, "The heck with you! I'm taking my stuff home."
You can't
and so you have to learn that it's a cooperative, not in the sense of a co-op, but it's a shared kind of concept.
But it's also a way in which, if you have, let's talk not about 401ks and so forth, but if you have ownership. Stock. Let's just say mostly it's stock. It represents asset ownership in our economy. You have a share of that. That's a legitimate way for income to come to you.
Correct.
And it's coming to you if it's right that the input mix to production is increasingly, in this mentor economy for the world, the United States, if the trend, you have to look at trends historically and so forth. If you look at if the trend is one where increasingly it's technological instruments and capital assets that are creating wealth. Automation's right over the corner. Lord Keynes said in that he wrote a letter to his grandchildren. He said, we are going to be confronted with something you can hardly see, technological unemployment. We are going to have a surplus capability of producing, and we're going to have some way for the folks to have income to buy what's able to be produced when their labor and the rationale of distributing income by their labor production and their contribution to production is not sufficient to clear the market. We're going to have to start sharing ownership as an income distribution vehicle on a large scale all over the planet, because the system we're locked into now is very limited.
I can be with you on the bottom line. I'm not as pessimistic that we're all going to become obsolete.
That is not. We're going to become liberated.
Listen.
We're going to become liberated.
That's but we're all going to continue to be human beings and work and do the things we do. And again, that's the line between Kelsoian economics and standard economics. People create, the tools.
Well, it's the labor theory of value.
Without people, you wouldn't have the ability to have money make money.
Do you ever?
Money's not people.
No, not money. No.
Assets are not money.
Not assets. They represent. You ever? I don't think God should be just proscribed up in the sky. I think he should be elected. I'd like to run for God. And would I get your vote? Do you think?
I'd have to think about it, Harold. I'd have to think about it.
But I would say, for one thing, set up the universe right, and hot fudge sundaes would really be good for you. Number one.
All right.
But I like that stuff. I like cheesecake. Do you like cheesecake?
Yeah,
I love it. You have the Sara Lee.
I've had cheesecake.
Have you ever had that?
I've had it all.
Really good. I had it the other day.
Yeah.
They're making that stuff over there. There's not a single individual human being in there making all that cheesecake.
Well, having said that,
it's all just programs doing it.
I was in an ESOP company in Passaic, New Jersey yesterday. They make the liquid that you put in the toilet to unstop your toilet.
Okay.
150 employee owners, many of them Spanish speaking, of course. Here's my point. Having grown up in an oil field,
around
refineries,
sensitive to that,
sensitive to the fact, manufacturing that uses liquid processes has always been extremely automated, going back to the 30s and the 20s. Basically what you do is you take a liquid and you run it through some machines, and a handful of people measure the liquid and look at it. It's not the classic bring in the steel and mold the steel and hammer the steel and take the machine. So the process of having very few laborers create things of value has always been a fact of life in any liquid flow. Well, wait a second. In any liquid flow process. And any liquid flow process has, had extremely high levels of automation before we even talked about automation, kind of thing. And the point I would make is that the human being, the human condition is flexible enough. We'll adjust to all of that. And all I'm saying is from the standpoint of the private sector economy, the idea that you're going to create more and better in terms of both the quality of work, the quality of the workplace, the fairness of sharing the profits through the value of the shares.
Okay, that's good.
Is going to be facilitated and helped by this concept of having the employees be shared owners through the ESOP.
No question, absolutely. Now, you would take exception. I'm going to show a chart. It's Lewis's chart, right? You can bring it up on the screen. Now, this presents a trend. This presents a situation which leads to undercut a thing called the labor theory of value. Now, you come in tight, they got it there. This is a trend. You can see it through time. It's Tom Jefferson over on the one side, 10% of the input to production was something other than labor. Do you know how many they had to cut down all those trees?
And there's people that disagree with that chart. I'm not disagreeing, because I don't know enough about economics to agree or disagree.
If this is correct, so the chart was
about America have an ownership stake in
any. It doesn't. And it
But
this is
I
the
would
trend.
submit it
If
will
this
grow
is
over
the
time.
trend,
It will
it
grow
should
over
be
time.
the major way in which you should, if this is true, and you're in touch with the zeitgeist and what's going on, 90% of the income of everybody in the United States of America should be coming from something other than their work.
And you're moving in that moving in that direction.
Fast enough.
And you're moving in that direction, Harold. Be blunt about it.
Yeah.
With 401ks.
Okay, it's coming, but it's not
And
coming
the
fast
thing
enough.
about the 401k is, of course, their ownership stake is not related to the work that they do.
Mm-hmm.
The 401k generally is going to be ownership in the publicly traded marketplace,
right, okay.
versus where 98% of the economy is, which is in private companies.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're
Now,
right.
a lot of folks
You're
in
right.
New York City
Yeah.
have trouble recognizing economies worldwide. I don't care whether they're Arabic or they're
yeah,
European or
that's right.
American. Most economy operations that make money are privately owned.
Absolutely,
and
no
not
question.
publicly
and
traded.
they're all owned and have traditionally only been owned by a tiny group of people that are called plutocrats. That's
As
what,
opposed to
that's
the-
what he calls it.
Yeah,
the plutocrat.
as opposed
Concentrated
to
ownership.
the growing ownership share of the public marketplace.
Yeah, but it's small, not nearly striking enough. It's not enough of irrigating the whole society. And this is
it's
a model
more
for
than
the
it was
world.
10 years ago. It's more than 20.
You're
and
happy
there's
with the trends.
and the General Social Survey, the GSS.
Yes, right, in Chicago, right?
That out of the University of Chicago
Yeah.
shows millions and millions of Americans.
Yeah.
Something around 40 million either have company stock or stock through the profit sharing plan or the 401k or whatever. Now, is the percentage enough to have you feel comfortable that the wage inequality, the income, you don't like the word wage, that the income inequality
And the
is
wealth. And the wealth.
shrinking? I would submit that that's probably the case, that it's not shrinking the way it should as people have more ownership shares. But I would submit to you that there are forces at work in the economy, the global economy,
Yes.
that are making individuals in modern societies more and more owning a piece. And I mentioned to you before
Not
we went on
the-
before I went on the
Okay.
air, very popular idea in Washington is every American born gets and this is a Lou Kelso
Yeah,
idea.
right. That would
Every
be, yeah.
American born gets
And let it compound.
$1,000
And let it
the day
compound.
the day they're born,
Uh-huh.
and it's invested in the public market. Now the beauty, and I'm more into the human side of this.
Yeah.
The beauty of the ESOP model, and I don't have any problems with those who want to emphasize the other things that Lou Kelso promoted. But the beauty of the ESOP model is you're not just sharing in the ownership of something you don't know a thing about, but it's something you're connected to.
Right. There's a human connection.
The human
among
connect,
the,
and that's what
right.
what I loved
Yeah,
about
right,
the ESOP
right.
world and some of the men
Absolutely.
you've interviewed who ran ESOP companies.
Well, I've been trying to get in touch.
and having noted that when I visit with people, and some are members of Congress, and
Right.
some are staff, and some
Sure.
are employees,
Yeah, you're in Washington, yeah.
and they say, well, the ESOP is not the real ownership, not the real ownership, because one of the first-year property concepts
Right,
of
yeah.
property,
In law, you did law. Yeah.
yep, is that you can buy and sell what you own whenever you want it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
If you're an ESOP, you can't do that. It's in
Okay.
the trust, all
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah, right,
It's
it's trust,
tied
yeah.
up. And I respond to that this way, Harold. I can own 50,000 shares of General Motors.
That'd be good.
If I went into, I cannot, owning 50,000, 100, I don't care how many shares you want me to own.
Mm-hmm.
I no more influence
Yeah,
what they do
right,
with their
right.
cars
Yeah.
and what color they paint them
Yeah, yeah.
and what they do about their vehicle
Yeah.
than a man in the moon.
Yeah.
But if I'm owning my ESOP share
Right, right.
in a company where they have participation and they've taken the ownership culture, we call it,
Mm-hmm.
and have tried to create that in the company,
Mm-hmm.
I have more impact
Yeah.
on what happens. I
Yeah.
can see my impact.
You know, I can
am
understand.
connected to that.
It's human. It's
It's
at a human
right,
level,
right.
and that's and I'm here to say everyone should support you and your association.
I understand.
And all that sort of thing and everything like that. Well, I don't know. We had a little clip. I don't know if we can get that in. We only got a couple of minutes
Yeah,
left.
just a short deal.
Yeah, if we can set that up, we got a little
just show
clip
kind
about
of the
it.
main things
just
that we
show
do.
the ESOP a little bit, George.
Kind
if you
of
could run that clip now, we want to get it in real quick. We can get it here and then. We're talking with J. Michael Keeling, an important person who should be supported by one and all in this society and the association he represents. But run that little piece of tape just here, George, if you could now, then please. Thank you. Got it in.
Yeah,
I wasn't
that's
sure
amazing.
that we're going to push the button at the right time. Here's
That's
the
a
time.
good quote, by the way.
Here. So we're just going to get in. We only have a minute to close it out.
Okay. See, the discussion you and I had.
All over America, companies seeking new and effective ways to increase business are discovering employee ownership. They are finding that ownership increases productivity, it heightens competitiveness, and it creates a culture where the employees work together for a common goal, the mutual success of their company and themselves. Because with employee ownership, a business is nothing more than the people who work for it. An employee-owned company enables its workers to share in the wealth that they've helped to create. It's no coincidence that 30% of the 100 best companies to work for in America are employee-owned.
The difference in working in ESOP companies is that the people have different values. The people have a concept, and if you believe in the concept, the companies are better companies. They produce a better product, they're more profitable, the people enjoy working.
At the forefront of this exciting move in American business is the ESOP Association. The ESOP Association is the national association for companies with employee stock ownership plans. Located in Washington, D.C., it is the #1 organization for creating favorable ESOP legislation in Congress. But it's much more than a lobbying group. The ESOP Association is the...
Okay, that's good. We got it.
Yeah,
That's good. That's good. That's
But
the beginning of a very good piece.
let
We
me
only got a
say
minute
this.
or so left.
Let me try to summarize
Yeah,
the
we only got
discussion
about
here.
a minute left.
You know, the statement by my good friend Joel Gabrielson about the spirit, the values. You know, Harold, you were looking at the big picture and the long-term trends.
Yeah, that's my problem.
When I think about the ESOP companies and the people, and I see their values, because
Yeah.
I'm not going to be here 30, 40, 50 years from now, to be honest about it. And I see what's happening today
Yeah.
in those companies. Whether there's 8,000 or 25,000, it's exciting,
Yeah.
it's fair,
Yeah.
and it's a good thing.
And it's a hell of a
and
good-
God
yeah,
bless
yeah.
folks like you
Yeah.
that are looking at the big picture and our friends that have tried to promote Kelso. But I'd say, you know what? Let's celebrate the good things
Well, I
going on
wouldn't
with
more
the
than
companies
that.
right
More-
now.
I couldn't say more than that. All the good people, it should be supported by one and all the power people, and the general society should support what you're doing. I wish you all the very best.
Well, thank you,
and
Harold.
I really thank you for coming in to Manhattan Network.
Yeah.
Welcome to Public Access
Oh, yeah,
and
you
so
bet.
forth.
You
And
bet.
it's your pleasure to have had the Perceptions in. J. Michael Keeling, president of Associative J.J. Pickle, was that it?
Yeah, you
and
J.J.
so
Jake.
forth, and that sort of thing. And the president of the ESOP Association of Washington, very important organization that should be supported by one and all. Thank you very much. We'll be coming back again tomorrow. And once again, thanks a whole lot
Okay,
for
thank you,
coming in.
Harold.
Appreciate it very much.
We'll see
indeed.
you. Take care.
So that's you don't stay. They're running credits and things like that.
Okay.
So you want to stay put. So anyway, I got some papers and things I'll give you
Okay.
if you want.
And I got to run over to see
I
my
know.
daughter.
Oh, good. She's here in New York?
She lives in Brooklyn.
Oh,
And
good deal.
She'll be after your heart. She works for an operation
Got
that's heavily
grandchildren
funded.
yet?
No, heavily funded by the city of New York, called the Appellate Defenders,
Okay.
Office of Appellate Defenders,
Uh-huh.
and they do the appellate work for the folks in prison, of course, who can't afford
Good for her,
attorneys.
yeah, yeah.
And that's, of course, 99.9% of the
I
people
know.
that are incarcerated.
We do not live in
They're,
the
they're,
just.
they're down. They're down in Lower Manhattan,
Yeah.
and I've seen her argue before the New York appellate
She's an
courts.
attorney then, right?
Yep,
Yep.
yep. Went to CUNY Queens. She's a
Queens.
graduate of CUNY
Chip off
Queens.
the old block. Yeah, my dad was.
Well,
an attorney.
she's in the trenches, and
Yeah.
I've always been more painting on the larger
right.
canvas.
Well, everybody
she
serves,
she
huh?
wants to change the world. I've often said one person at a time. And
All
I've,
right,
and
well.
I've tried to be involved with a much